we have to catch up with the latest episode of the HBO original series, The Last of Us. We just got episode 7 this past weekend, which was entitled Left Behind. And so, coming off of episode 6, we were starting to transition really sort of into the final act of the season. And coming into this week, we knew that this week's episode was going to actually adapt the downloadable content expansion that was released alongside the game, which was also entitled Left Behind. It came out in 2014, about a year after the original game dropped. And it was also adapting the American Dreams comic book, which was like a 4-story limited run issue that Neil Druckmann also wrote to accompany the story of the original game. And so this episode in particular was going to adapt those pieces of the Last of Us story that we've seen thus far. And so before we dive into spoilers, before we talk about all the details of everything that we saw with this week's brand new episode of The Last of Us, I will pass it over to you to give your initial big picture non-spoiler thoughts about this week's episode of The Last of Us. What did you think?
They killed it. They absolutely killed it. As somebody who played the DLC to The Last of Us, titled Left Behind, and to come into this episode Left Behind, somebody who, again, it just happens when you've happened to play the source material, read the source material, you compare. You really don't have, it just happens. They killed it. They absolutely, the things that they changed were all for the better. It's also something about, I think, the nuance of acting that even I will argue this episode is better than the DLC for sure. It's very tremendous work, I think, that they're doing adapting this television series. And yeah, they just kill it, man. Between Storm Reid and Bella Ramsey, who literally have to own this episode. They are, I think, the definition of two teenage actresses who are going to be something ridiculous when they get older. They did such good work here. The ideas that they have to hammer home here within The Last of Us, the things that they change, make it even more of an intimate story than, again, even the DLC did, which fits the TV show perfect of what they're trying to do. Yeah, it's just all good, man. It's all exactly what I think I was looking for. It's all coming together in the way that I think or was hoping that it would. We only have 2 episodes left, and I love where we are right now. I even love that they took the time to give us a flashback episode here that, again, maps to that DLC, man, because I think, one, it's a hard thing to pull off, and 2, it adds so much context to who I think Ellie is as a character that it just left me almost speechless, man. And I was like, dang, they are really doing this thing. So I don't have too much to add to that. That's not spoilery, man, but they did a tremendous job. Shout out to the production designers of this episode. Shout out to the actors. Shout out to all parties involved, man. It's just another home run for me. And I think we may be onto something when it comes to The Last of Us.
So I think what's particularly genius about this week's episode, which I loved, by the way, is the fact that we are still faithfully adapting something that was created for a video game while simultaneously using a tool within the medium of television to convey that episode, because this is the most faithful bottle episode that I would say that we've gotten out of the series. You don't necessarily expect a bottle episode within The Last of Us because it is sticking so much to the game, but this really is the true definition of that. And when you look at the history of bottle episodes that have been super successful, I think about Pine Barrens with The Sopranos, The Fly with Breaking Bad, and probably one of the best ones is The Suitcase with Mad Men. These episodes that are sort of these isolated standalone adventures, minimal amount of characters. They mostly take place within one location, and they still are able to come out on the other side being some of the most memorable moments within those respective series. And I think now we have a similar situation now with Left Behind, because it's so interesting that the Left Behind DLC was released a year after the initial video game, but now they have found the perfect place within the television series, within the main narrative, to create this episode and to insert it in the appropriate point in time of the story. And you called that out last week, that this was really just kind of the perfect transition point. And it was just so expertly done and well executed across the board. And I loved it for that. I love that we could just go deeper into the psyche of Ellie as a character and really just have Bella Ramsey front and center for this entire episode alongside Storm Reid coming into this. And very much similar and mirroring what we saw in the video game, The Last of Us as an experience is really our two primary characters coming into contact with a lot of different humans along their journey. And these humans, in many different respects, are reflective of the relationship that we see established between Joel and Ellie. And though that this was a bottle episode and sort of takes us away from the main linear storytelling that's happening with their particular relationship, we don't leave this episode saying like, yeah, that was pointless, because everything that happened in this episode still continues to inform their very own relationship from the very opening moments of this episode all the way into those final closing minutes. It's like, that's why this is in here, and that's why it's in here at this place and time. And so again, they do an excellent job across the board bringing this to life for me, and I loved everything about it. So I am still eagerly anticipating everything that's left within the final 2 episodes. But with all of that out the way, let's talk about this episode, break it down, do a deep dive on episode 7 of The Last of Us. So if you've not checked out Left Behind, definitely go watch that episode and come back and listen to the rest of our conversation. So this week, we pick up things where we left off last week. Joel is pretty much on the brink of death. He is in bad shape after he got shivved when they were in Salt Lake City, Utah at the medical facility. Ellie is now taking care of him and doing everything that she can to try to revive him and make sure that he does not perish. And Joel has this really interesting moment where he demands her to abandon him and leave. And he tells him to go find Tommy and to finish out this journey because I'm pretty much a dead man. There's nothing you can do for me. And we get this moment of hesitation from Ellie because it looks like that she is going to actually take his advice and leave. But instead, what she does is grab the door handle, and that takes us to a flashback moment, which is where this episode primarily takes place, is in the past. And we get to see the relationship start to develop between Ellie and this new character that's been introduced in this week's episode, Riley, played by Storm Reid. And so I want to start off, with everything that we saw with Ellie, just the opening moments of seeing sort of her upbringing, or at least the first moments that we really start to get to know her. She's in this Fedra military school. She's running drills. They're training every day. They're essentially getting her ready to be an officer on behalf of Fedra, which is something that I don't know if people necessarily expected, but we see that she had a pretty rough time a part of this military school. She was getting bullied frequently. She didn't really have any friends, and we find out that the only friend she does have is in essence Riley, which turns out to be more than a friendship sort of relationship between the two. But what did you think about just seeing her, running these drills and also getting a stern speech from like the commanding officer saying like, we see a ton of potential in you. We see that there's a leader within you, but you're not maximizing your potential. What's your path going to be in life? Where are you going to choose to go? How are you going to walk these next few steps of the next few years of your life? What did you think about just the way that they opened up this week's episode?
Yeah, I think a lot of this episode is also just an intrusive look into what it is like to be a kid in this moment in time in the world, man. All of these kids are pretty much forced to go to the military school, like you said, but it's also very clear that Ellie does not belong here, or she at least feels like she doesn't belong, right? She has her Walkman on. She's just trying to mind her business, but she hates everything and everybody around her because nobody, I think, understands her, right? Except for Riley. And so, when we're seeing this school, I think it's crazy to see how this is the best case scenario I think we have for a lot of these kids. I think when we're watching the sequence, we're supposed to think, man, y'all in military school, y'all don't have any kind of normal classes like we used to have. There's no music classes. There's no, even if they are in PE as we see them running around the gym, I'm sure they're not in there playing dodgeball. I'm sure they're not in there pooping. You know what I'm saying? They're literally building these kids up to just watch other people or to be officers in this small town, in this QZ where Fedra exists, man. And I think that's a crazy and low-key sad way that these kids have to grow up. They somewhat grow up in a box, and you're meant to take these moments with Ellie in the beginning looking at the school, and then eventually look at Riley and be like, I get why you left, kind of type thing. I think that's part of the reason they do that. I think another reason that they're showing us this is to for us to see that Fedra and the Fireflies and really all the factions in this world, there is sure they all pick sides, but they're all either just as good or just as bad as you want to make them seem. And they're all pretty much, in these weird places, or they're all trying to make the best of the situations in which they have. And so the officer kind of appealing to Ellie in I think the telling her he sees potential in her. I believe him. I think he's for real. But that's also the only reality that he can give to these kids. That's the only hope that he can give to somebody like Ellie. And be like, you're smart, but you can't go to college. All I can tell you is give you a bed. You can go to sleep at whatever time you want to. You have all these perks, but that's all I can give you. And so I think it's a short period of time in which we see her in this military school, but I think it's very indicative of the world building that they're trying to tell us.
Yeah, these kids are part of this military school. It's very much like what you would sort of expect a military school to be like. They're not being educated, as you said. They're not having these classes that we would typically associate with what you would go through in your adolescence. They're being trained physically, mentally, emotionally to essentially protect QZs, act on behalf of Fedra, and hunt fireflies. They're training them to be soldiers. And so while that might not inherently be evil, you do look at it and say, like, okay, we understand that this faction certainly takes a stance against the Fireflies, but the people on behalf of Fedra are not just these sadistic, twisted people. At least what they present, most of them are not that. They're just normal human beings that are following a rigorous schedule, and they have discipline a part of their lives. This is just what they have found their purpose to be. And Ellie is supposed to be sort of the next in line with that. It's just following along with protocol, and that, again, that's not an inherently evil thing to do. But what we do see is that because of this discipline and because of this sort of indoctrination to the system of beliefs and ideals, they grow up to manifest these different things that turn out to be violent and turn out to be oppressive towards other factions and other groups within this particular world. And Ellie, from the get-go, is just sort of rebelling against that. She just does not work well within these four walls, within the system. That's just not how she's designed to be, because she is an orphan by the time we pick up with her in the story altogether. And so her experience with parenthood, her experience with a normal social structure, with a household, none of that stuff exists. She was born into this world the way that it is, the way that we see it illustrated each week on screen. And so a lot of that stuff we alluded to weeks ago back in episode 2, where she just had these weird sort of social cues and she sort of found enjoyment out of the sadistic. I think a lot of that stuff is being sort of called back to in these moments where we just see that she's just been born into this. She's born into an environment that's all about rigorous training, discipline, systems of class and structure, and she's just not been exposed to even some of the more horrific things that take place outside of the QZ, the real world, so to say, that we're existing in right now. So I think that this was just a great way to start off there and to really reinforce that idea of who she is as a person. We meet Riley, who is played by Storm Reid in this week's episode, who has pretty much kind of gone AWOL from the Federal Military School. She's been gone for 3 weeks. And Ellie just assumed that she's dead. This is, again, sort of the only person that Ellie has any substantial relationship with. And it's truly deep down because she has a crush on her. She has a more romantic affection for Riley, but they also have a true, genuine friendship. They've known each other. They've interacted, of course. They're kind of going through this experience together, but Riley has just been absent. She finally returns to their bedroom and they're teasing each other. And Riley invites her on an adventure at a mall that we'll get to in specifics here in a second. But what do you think about just the presence of Storm Reid here coming in to play this really, really integral character to the development of Ellie? Because I think all throughout the season, we've gotten small Easter eggs and small teases to the fact that Ellie has once had somewhat of a relationship with somebody that she's cared about. She's known somebody that has been taken away from her ultimately. And that is indeed Riley. We, of course, knew that because of the video game experience, but a lot of people probably didn't know what that relationship looked like. What did you think about just this sort of this new love story that they try to develop this week's episode between Ellie and Riley?
It's in some ways, between the Fedra and the Fireflies of it, they try to make it a little bit Shakespearean, right? A little bit Romeo and Juliet-ish. between two people who very much love each other being on two separate sides of things. But I think what's interesting about the casting here is Storm Reid is somewhat bigger in stature than Bella Ramsey here. And I think I was looking at it and I was like, I wonder if that's on purpose. I wonder if they purposely was trying to make Storm Reid or Riley, if they were trying to make Riley somewhat of not only someone, of course, that Ellie very much has a crush on, right? But a lot of times our fresh crushes do tend to be the people that do tend to be like a couple years older. You know what I mean? Like a lot of us had our first crushes like a couple years older, and you look at them, you go, ooh. In the DLC, the video game, they very much feel the same age, but Riley here and Storm Reid feels very much older. So I always thought, or I was thinking in watching it, if that was a purpose, a choice that was done purposefully. But another thing about this episode, man, that just doesn't work if they don't do it right is Storm Reid and Bella Ramsey's performances have to be spot on in order for this episode to work, and they just do. And so throughout the episode, I've really loved Ellie and Riley's chemistry, as no matter what Riley is showing Ellie's eyes are constantly lighting up. Like of course, there's very much a lot of reasons for that, right? But I love that because this episode does play a little bit off nostalgia for the viewer. That like we're like, well, yeah, if you don't know what that is, of course your eyes will light up. I kind of explained in a couple review episodes we had of Last of Us, previous episodes, how Ellie was constantly the light of the world in the moments that we get to see her. She's always the person telling jokes or making Sam smile, and things like that. But here, it's really Riley giving her the joy. She's angry at school. She doesn't want to be there. But as soon as Riley gets back, it's now the joy of her life. She's smiling around Riley. She's looking up at her. I don't know. You can tell she's in a different state of happiness when she's around this girl, man. And it really is, I think, it tells about the story of what she's been through, of a love she once had and doesn't have anymore. And so even I look at Riley and I somewhat have to compare it to the love that Joel had for Sarah, like somebody that was there who no longer, ends up being there in the end, man. And so it's a really cool thing to see, I think, on screen. Again, it's translated so much better on screen than it is in the video game. Although the video game, don't get me wrong, the DLC is great, but that nuance, man, of being able to look at each other in very small ways, the human of it all makes it so much better here.
So that casting choice of Storm Reid, what was indeed very intentional. The fact that she is taller, she is technically, I think, older at this particular point in real life than Bella Ramsey is, because what this character presents for Ellie's development in this particular story, again, I think is a mirror reflection of what we're seeing from Joel, because Ellie is such a strong personality. She has a lot that she brings to the table. It's very rare that she comes across somebody, even if they're older than her and they're an adult, it's very rare that she comes across somebody that she sort of looks up to and aspires to be like. And I think that Riley represents that very much like what Joel represents for Ellie. That's somebody that she looks at in Joel as a protector, somebody that she can seek solace in and comfort in. Riley feels very similar in the fact that Storm Reid is much taller than Bella Ramsey and older. And also the character can present Ellie with these opportunities to push her boundaries because she is so secluded from society and the real world. Riley is that person that can help her push her limits. They're drinking alcohol together. They're taking this random excursion out in the middle of the night. These are limits that Ellie has not tested quite yet. And Riley presents that perfect person that can come into her life at a very pivotal point in time to say, the least of that, it's a person that can really just show you what's possible out there, what you can be capable of. And so I think that they absolutely had to get somebody that could really illustrate that on screen and illustrate that between the chemistry that we see between Bella Ramsey and Storm Reid. And it's just really well done. They work so incredibly well together because you just buy into the fact that they have shared history. They've been through a lot, but you also have somebody who Ellie can look at as her equal and not somebody that she can just easily run over. Because earlier in the episode, while she was running laps in the gym, listening to her Walkman, that one girl, Bethany, comes up and Ellie is afraid at all, even though Bethany is much taller and much bigger than Ellie. Bethany is physically imposing. and Ellie was ready to sock her lights out. She wanted all the smoke. And, it doesn't matter that somebody's bigger or older, but I think that the personality traits in the relationship and just how Riley has presented herself to Ellie, she's been opening up to her. She's been more vulnerable, but she also takes command, and she really kind of takes the driver's seat. I think Ellie just really respects that, and we get to see a lot of that developed over the course of this episode, and also just sort of call back to, because again, that they have a shared history with each other. That takes us to the mall, which is a surprise that Riley had for Ellie. This is ripped straight from the downloadable content package. They pretty much spend, I would say, 90 to 95% of the episode here. And the whole point of this is because Riley wants to just spend some quality time with Ellie and show her these quote unquote 4 wonders of the mall, which eventually turns into 5 wonders. But they just spend time having somewhat of a date with each other, exploring this mall, seeing everything that's available to them, whether it's the arcade or a carousel or the escalator, just these really weird things that us in normal society and in normal times, we kind of take for granted. Like, we don't think about malls at all at this point anymore. They're hardly a thing in 2023, if we're being honest, right? They've largely become non-existent across the country. But you look at something that just calls back so much nostalgia, because you see a food court and you see the carousel and you see escalators, you see all these stores, these real life stores like Target and Victoria's Secret even. They just did an incredible job bringing this to life and creating this element of nostalgia, but also giving us this backdrop that can serve as this canvas as a date between these two, which they don't acknowledge that it's a date, but that's really kind of what it is. And we just get to see that love grow and fester. But we find out that ultimately Riley does it because she intends to leave Boston altogether and go to Atlanta to another QZ. But what did you think about just seeing the mall brought to life? Again, because this is coming directly from the DLC, they faithfully adapted into live action and pretty much hit all the notable points that we hit playing that DLC package a few years ago.
Yeah, the production design here is absolutely and most definitely nuts, man. I was looking at a lot of, the set pieces and just how accurate they felt. I think if something was run down for umpteenth years, you know what I mean? I was like, dang, they did that really well. Even remember there was like a CBS in the back and the C was like hanging down. But I don't know, man. They did such a good job of putting this together. I think one of the things I'm looking forward to the most about the show is I think a longer documentary that's outside of the end of the episode, clips that we get where they're like, this is how we made this. Cause they even say they had to put a merry-go-round in a mall for this. And I just know that's probably not an easy thing to do, but to see how good and to see how perfect I think it turned out was everything. Again, especially because you are running through these wonders within the video game. They literally almost beat for beat. I think they're a little bit out of order, but I mean, I didn't care. But they're literally beat for beat. And everything that was happening, I was like, that's exactly what happened in the DLC. And it was just really cool to see. Like you said, I think this is the closest one-to-one episode that we get in all of this show so far. But I think it's for a reason. I think it makes sense that if it ain't broke, don't fix it. You know what I'm saying? And so it was really dope to see these wonders, man. And the nostalgia of it all. One of my favorite things is when they go to the photo booth and it's like, well, you like to upload this to Facebook? They were like, what's a Facebook? Or I remember she was reading the pun book and there was a pun in there about a screenshot. And they were like, what's the screenshot? And I was like, dang, these kids absolutely wouldn't know what any of that is. They probably heard about the concept of the internet, but I'm sure they don't know about the little things and nuances that the internet has to offer. So of course they would be like this, man. So I really love exploring, I think, the what they would consider wonders of the world, which we consider every day, because it's not only a lesson of, cherish what you have, but it really is one of those, man, you need to live, I think, in the moment and understand everything that's around you, because it could be taken away at any moment, and the kids of the next generation might not know what it is, for better or for worse. So man, it was really dope seeing, I think, all these wonders and how accurately they were portraying a lot of these set pieces according to the DLC.
First and foremost, the craftsmanship involved here for a television production is just it's really jaw-dropping and astounding and just so impressive across the board. They filmed this stuff, most of this stuff in an actual mall in Calgary that was slated to go underneath demolition very soon. Again, because malls are just not that much of a thing anymore. But there were also some sound stages that had to be created. Some of this stuff had to be enhanced with visual effects. So it's just a combination across many different forms of artistry bringing this stuff to life. And you can just look at just the detail, the attention to detail here, from the real usage of stores to the debris to the growing elements of nature taking over this location. It's just so beautifully done. And I certainly can't minimize even the contributions from like the lighting team to light this scene to make it look so beautiful. The coloring of it was all just phenomenal across the board. We don't see stuff like this every day on TV. And I just want to definitely call that out and give them the proper attention that they deserve. But again, from a story perspective, just also well done, because The Last of Us it's a show kind of, in part about the end of civilization, about the end of humanity. And when you think about the end of humanity, we just take for granted so many things. I think last week when we saw how much of a thriving community had existed in Wyoming, and we saw how beautiful that whole place was, and you contrast it with this week where you find this desolate location that has essentially no life in it at all. It's just an interesting comparison point, because last week I was just like, wow, they have a movie theater. They can still enjoy movies, although they won't get to see some of the finest movies that were released in the following years. They still have that enjoyment. And we come to this mall, which is just unoccupied with the exception of one infected, and it's abandoned, and they really can't take advantage of it. But thanks to Riley, she's able to extrapolate all the beautiful pieces about a mall that we would associate with those really nostalgic, very affectionate memories of what we would have with the mall. The arcade and the merry-go-round and the carousel and the food court, just those things that if you were around when malls were booming in America or in other countries, you were like, yeah, I remember spending a lot of time there and having a lot of fond memories of those places. Like when you see the arcade light up, it's just like, oh my God, that's literally my entire childhood playing out right in front of my very eyes. And that stuff was just so beautifully done. They played Mortal Kombat 2, which was incredible. And that was also a callback to episode 2 where Ellie recognizes the game and she's able to spout out Melina's fatality. She remembers all that stuff because of just how much of an eye-opening, wonderful experience it was for her that she experienced this alongside Riley, somebody that's so close to her. So it was just so beautifully done, man. It's the simplicity of the things that we see here that actually are the most effective. You don't always have to have super heady ideas. Sometimes it's these really simple things like just enjoying stuff that we take for granted on a day-to-day basis that can really be profound and be effective in the storytelling here. And with that, as we see them go across these different wonders of the mall, we're getting closer and closer to the moment where you can tell, like, okay, there's some electricity here. There's some chemistry between these two. There's more than just a friendship. There is some sort of romantic element. And they have a pivotal scene where Riley does reveal that she's going to leave Boston, go to Atlanta, go to the new QZ. And she name drops Marlene, as a person that's been influential in that decision. And Ellie is obviously affected by it, and she doesn't like it because she knows that she has more feelings for Riley than she's led on to believe. And so they have a pivotal moment where they put on those masks. Again, another scene that's recreated from the DLC. And they finally share that kiss between each other. And then slowly but surely, right thereafter, they just snatch the rug from underneath us because, hey, in this world, nobody can enjoy anything for a long period of time. When you have a moment of happiness, it has to be followed with just the most destructive, most sad moment that they could possibly throw at us, because an infected that has just been laying dormant in the mall finds them, attacks them, and we see that both Riley and Ellie are infected. Now, we come to find out that Ellie is immune. Of course, that's the premise of the show, but Riley, unfortunately, is not able to also have the same fate as Ellie. We know that because of the DLC, she succumbs to the infection, unfortunately, but we see them share those final moments with each other and just sit and soak up the time that they do have left, because Riley presents a few ultimatums. Maybe they can just end it quickly and kill themselves so that they don't have to deal with it, or maybe they can just ride it out. And as you said, let it be a little bit Shakespearean. Let it be a little bit romantic. Let's just enjoy what we have left, whether it's 2 minutes or 2 hours or 2 days or whatever Riley said in that particular moment. What did you think about just the way that they communicated that whole sequence and how they played it out? And also the fact that we don't see Riley ultimately perish. We don't see her death on screen, which I think is also an interesting choice as well. Not to, at least in this week, and I don't know if they'll revisit it next week, but at least in this week's episode, we don't see that visually displayed before us.
Yeah, it's interesting because in the game, in that moment, it's not just one infected. It's like a whole slew of infected, and you're running trying to exit the mall. And so that moment is I really love how they, I think, minimized it and only gave us one infected, because it made everything, even in that action sequence, it still made everything feel a little bit more intimate, with there being that one infected in the mall. And so I thought that was a dope change. I really like that. Also, man, what a The Last of Us, man, this is the essence of what this show is. You just said it, man. We can't have anything nice. We can't have anything. We can't be happy. We
Never.
can't. There's no light in The Last of Us. And if there is light, the darkness is on the way. It's always on the way. And here it happens to be almost immediate. They literally shared the kiss, and 60 seconds later are fighting an infected. It's the craziest thing, man. But that is literally how it goes. No, Druckmann is a psychopath, by the way. But this is the markup and the makeup of the video game and the show, man. This is what we get. I really, really, really love this moment, as dark as it is, between these two characters, because it really does shape Ellie. Not only Ellie as a character, but it shapes the moment, in which the choice that Ellie has, right after this, is counteracted with this. I think it's also interesting to mention, at the same time that this is happening in the game, that you're going through the mall, is cutting back and forth between her searching for supplies in a mall for Joel. And that's being cut back and forth between a new mall for her looking for supplies with Joel, and the old mall where her going to the Joel with Riley. And so here, man, she has this moment with Riley. And I think it's so interesting that we see another fit of rage come out of Ellie here after they both look at each other and they've both been bitten, where Riley kind of has accepted it in some form or fashion, right? This is when I seen the maturity. This is when I said Riley has this girl is low-key beyond her years in the ways in which that she has taken the news that she had just been bitten, and is eventually going to turn into a monster and infected, versus Ellie, who is smashing all the glass. She is trying to get all of her anger out at once, but for them to sit down and for Riley to say, we don't get to give up on the time that we have just because this is happening. We fight on. It's like one of the most important messages, I think, now throughout The Last of Us. Even though this DLC came out a year after the game, even though this episode is a flashback, that is literally, I think, one of the most important ideas and essence of what this show is we don't give up on the time that we have with the people that we do now, no matter what the end looks like. And that's the 10 out of 10ness that you get out of a TV show like this. That's the thing. That's the way you drive home, I think, an idea. And that's the reason. That's how you give a flashback meaning of the greater scope of things, man. It's so well done. It's really everything, and everything I think we came to see, and everything I was looking for out of this episode. In fact, this was also pretty 1-to-1 in the video game, and it's just a good moment, man, to sit and reflect and to think about everything that The Last of Us as a world brings to the table, man. It's just well done.
They love ripping our damn hearts out. I assure you, they just cannot resist telling the saddest shit on a week-to-week basis. But yeah, this is just an example of why I think so far this is probably Bella Ramsey's strongest performance as the character thus far, because as you said, she has a complete fit of rage. She just throws the worst tantrum we've seen out of her thus far, breaking all sorts of shit around her because of just the news. It's so crushing to her to realize, at least in that moment, she thinks she's done. She thinks she's gonna die and turn ultimately, which is the equal to death in this world. And you juxtapose that earlier in this episode, which it was a much quieter performance from her. You know, she's not reacting to much. She's very she's very kind of apathetic to a lot of things that people say to her. She doesn't really care. Nothing moves her unless it is coming directly from Riley. And then we get moments of joy and love and affection and sort of wonderment out of her earlier in the episode. But this is just like turning that all on its head because she is trying to come to grips with everything that's happening before her. And Riley, who is a person who has experienced loss, has just accepted it for what it is. Whereas Ellie she's not yet gone through this emotionally tumultuous period of what it's like to lose somebody and what that thought process would entail in that very moment. So we just see her lose it entirely. It's just so well done to see that. And I think that everything you see here in this moment, this final shared moment between the two, it's something that'll stick with you after you watch the episode. It's the one piece of imagery that you'll remember. Ellie just curling up in Riley's arms for protection, for comfort, for warmth, things that she has never gotten in her life. And in the lowest moment thus far that she's experienced, she has somebody that she loves right there next to her to comfort her, even in this really dire moment, as you said, to just take advantage of the time that you have left with each other. It's just really profound and really emphatic of everything that they're trying to do with this show. And that takes us to the final moments of this episode entirely. As you said, all of this stuff is sort of cross-cut between Ellie looking for supplies to try to save Joel. Again, just drawing parallels to the idea that Ellie is recalling the memories of what it was like to experience this with Riley and remembering what was told to her and remembering that idea that I'm going to fight until the very last minute that I cannot fight anymore. Not only because Riley told me that, but also because Joel has exhibited that thus far in this relationship. He's done, for the most part, almost anything that he could do to protect her. And we're seeing her take the same approach, finding all the supplies that she needs, which, in the game, you got to look through a lot of drawers in many locations. That's half the game, I would say, is looking through drawers for fucking supplies. So they communicate that here, and we just see her start to stitch up the wounds of Joel to do everything that she can to save him, which is also just interesting because of the wounds that people suffer throughout this world. It's telling because, as you said, that moment when the affected attacked them in the mall, it's nowhere near to the degree of what we experienced in the game. There's multiple infected, but it's only one there. But I think it's so interesting because of how closely they hold the infected to the vest in the series. And it just shows like one's dangerous enough and one mortally wounded Riley and nearly mortally wounded Ellie, and she's going to live with that scar for the rest of her life, even though she is immune. Joel is living with many scars all throughout his life that he'll never be able to get rid of, and this is going to be another one of them, but Ellie's going to stitch it up and get him back to a place of health and get him back to where he needs to be. So it just ends off in that really, really profound moment, again, drawing those parallels between those two particular important moments in Ellie's life. And as we look towards next week, we get a sneak peek of what's to come. Again, there's only 2 episodes left. And next week's episode is going to be equally as important because we'll get the introduction of David. And for those who have not played the video game, we won't spoil David's role in this particular story, but just with the best that you can do without getting into the details of who he is as a character and what he means to everything we're going to see next week. What are you looking forward to out of the introduction of him? And also his relationship to Ellie, because what I will say without getting into the details of it, it's mostly about David and Ellie, what we'll see. That's mostly the relationship that's going to take place, but it also looks like we'll get a chance to dive deeper into who David is as a person, which we don't really get the opportunity to do so in the video game. What are you looking forward to next week, and what are you hoping to see?
Oh man. I guess kind of spoiler, but not spoiler. David is a villain. I'm ready to see some villainy in the what David brings to the table in his role as a villain. It's these last 2 episodes are gonna be a lot, y'all. I don't know if y'all understand or know where it's going, but it's gonna be a lot. And I'm excited to see really just still everything be translated on screen, man. It is such an interesting show where even as I'm saying, David is the villain now. The villain literally changes like every episode as we've seen thus far, man. It could just be the infected one episode. It could be, what was her name from Kansas City? Kathleen. I forgot her name. Kathleen in another episode. It really can't be anybody, but David also brings a good amount of scariness and mess to him. And I think I'm excited to see another, I think, dimension of horror that David brings to the table that we haven't seen yet out of the villains that we've seen so far. So I'm very excited for that. I'm excited to see how crazy the stakes get too. Knowing what I know, how everything ramps up in a TV show adaptation of this story. I'm excited to see that. I'm excited to see technically it's a penultimate episode. We know how penultimate episodes go. There's usually a ton going on. And so I think I'm just very excited to be entertained. I'm very excited to see how they continue to bring us in this world in this video game adaptation, man. And that's pretty much it, man. I'm also excited to see the performances across the board. Like you said, this is Ellie in David thing, and I think from the performance we've seen from Bella Ramsey this episode, I'm hoping that it's even another ramp up. It's another level up in Bella Ramsey in this next episode, man. I think it's going to be dope to see how it goes down.
Yeah, David as a character, I think represents in the video game, and what I'm hoping to see next week is the pure manifestation of what consequences look like in this world and what those repercussions will ultimately entail. Which these final two episodes in particular, there will be a lot of that. Just the things that you do and how they come back to haunt you. We've seen that all throughout this season thus far, but David really is, I think, probably the most pivotal character as to what that'll mean for our heroes, in particular between Joel and Ellie. And that's then just going to curtail into the events of the final episode, which is sure to be just absolutely explosive once we get that in a couple weeks. But I cannot wait until next week's episode because it will surely be another emotional journey. But folks, those are all of our thoughts on this week's episode of The Last of Us. If you've checked out episode 7 on HBO, definitely hit us up and let us know what you think.